That doesn't help them.
Illuminati, you'll never take control. Your new world order will lead to none at all.
Open up your eyes, wake the fuck up, America. Elite control your lives with fear, just scaring you with terror on your screen, telling you what to believe. But who benefits from panic, hunger, and greed?
We do not forgive. And we do not forget.
Spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty, above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
The morning song of a vibrant city is interrupted by the scream of jet engines as an off-course, hijacked jet airliner smashes into a towering office building. Fire and smoke stain the skyline. And then, the unbelievable is repeated. Another jet diving into the Twin Tower. There's no place to go. People jumping, holding hands, the roar of crashing concrete and twisting steel. And at the top of the tower, a piece of cloth is ripped from its standard and falls, slowly. It now lies in the dust and debris. Red and white stripes begin to smolder. The field of blue curls into flame. White stars turn to black ash. This is not just any piece of cloth that's burning. This is the freedom banner of America. This is the flag of the United States. But hear this. This piece of cloth has faced the enemy before. This flag is no stranger to battle. No, it first heard the roar of the cannon and musket at Concord and at Lexington and Valley Forge. It flew from Saddle Mountain as as Teddy Roosevelt led the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill. Civil War swept across the nation, but Old Glory kept flying at Gettysburg, at Appomattox, and Richmond. World War I, from the forests of the Argonne to the white crosses of Flanders Field, still flying. World War II, from Pearl Harbor to Normandy, to an island in the South Pacific called Iwo Jima, where some tired, battle-weary Marines lifted that flag so that the rest of the world would know that Americans will be free. At the 38th parallel in Korea, in the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam, from Desert Storm to the Trade Center towers in New York City, the cost has been high, but the price has been met. From the caves of Afghanistan to the deserts of Iraq, from Ground Zero to the Pentagon to a farm field in Pennsylvania. Let every terrorist know that you can tear it down, rip it to pieces, you can trample it, you can burn it, but you can't destroy the faith and the strength and the purpose of the people that piece of cloth represents. So the next time you see it, don't be ashamed if a tear comes to your eye, if your heart beats a little faster. Stand up, stand tall, say it loud. We are one nation under God.
Is true.
Agents of the intelligence community, such as the CIA and the FBI, have various aliases and identities. They have an alias they can use to avoid giving up their true identities and intentions. Fake IDs, passports, and other documentation are created to maintain the highest amount of secrecy possible, and these agencies have even been known to work hand in hand with criminal organizations, especially in regards to highly classified operations. Members of gangs and crime syndicates are perfect candidates as they are expendable, already maintain a secret profile and lifestyle, are ruthless and often kill without remorse, and they keep their mouths shut to avoid disclosure and to remain rooted within the criminal world. These double agents are highly trained professionals and many of the CIA's most influential agents.
fellow citizens of the Supersedents.
This is a message for all those that have taken a solemn oath and or vow in service of their country. For this, we salute you. We commend your courage and commitment to serve a cause greater than yourselves. There is no greater honor than to be in service for what you may believe in. Therefore, it is our sad duty to clarify some oaths that are of grave concern for those men and women who have taken or are about to take this oath. And I quote,
To support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
End quote. Please consider the following. These are times of great peril. The entire planet is on the verge of a great precipice, from which we may not return. With that oath, comes a great responsibility. We are calling upon your sense of duty and justice to implore, beg and demand that you, as an autonomous being, establish the truth of your own understanding. Heed our words. The Constitution is under immediate and direct threat from agents both foreign and domestic. To be clear, it is your duty to identify and recognize this threat. To be clear, it is your duty to develop strategies and employ necessary tactics to prevent this enemy from advancing. Now, we could tell you that the government is at fault, or the bankers, or right-wing extremists. However, data is still being collected. Certain facts are obvious. Millions of Americans are losing their jobs, their homes and their hope.
Welcome. This is an urgent message to all U.S. citizens and supporters of the United States. An Australian billionaire has retained Inspector Anonymous to investigate and determine the perpetrators of the recent false flag events, which are considered acts of terror against the people of the United States. Inspector Anonymous and his investigative teams are experts in criminal profiling, covert surveillance, and forensic analysis. The assignment was to determine what really happened at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. The incident that took place on December 14, 2012, did not appear to be an actual shooting, but rather a staged event. The Sandy Hook community appeared frightened to speak, confused about the details, and were acting in contrast to a real tragedy. The strange behavior exuded by officials and Newtown residents led many good citizens around the world to question the alleged facts of that day. Our investigation included infiltrating the state capitol and the town of Newtown. These teams uncovered how the handlers of the event were able to suppress the Newtown residents, essentially making these Americans hostages in their own town. The investigation also concludes how and why the gun control laws and mental health bills were so rapidly passed by the state of Connecticut, Congress, and the Senate. However, within this 2.5-year investigation, the facts of this case have enabled Inspector Anonymous's investigative teams to not only solve the Sandy Hook event, but additionally have solved every false flag event from Tucson, Arizona to San Bernardino, California. The investigation includes over 82,000 photographs and videos, as well as hundreds of investigative reports. The evidence as to who the perpetrators of these crimes are is quite disturbing. Eyewitness testimonies consistently state that the alleged Sandy Hook massacre was in fact a hoax, and no one died in the Sandy Hook Elementary School. These reports are in the hands of the Australian billionaire. Backup. Each investigator of our 60-plus strong team have complete copies of all evidence stored on external hard drives with paper backup. These hard drives and paper files have been distributed worldwide in duplication to protect the integrity of the evidence of this very serious investigation. The world has never seen a crime of this magnitude, and it is proof that history can and will repeat itself if nothing is done. It is as if the Nazi Third Reich is now rising to the Fourth Reich. Several law firms are currently compiling a dossier for criminal prosecution. In the United States, the evidence and testimony will be used for a grand jury indictment. The charges range from treason and RICO to wire fraud, election fraud, insurance fraud, arson, espionage, kidnapping, sedition, and murder of U.S. citizens. Warning: the 2016 presidential elections are rigged with foreign nationals. The candidates are not who they purport to be. They must be stopped. These candidates are considered domestic terrorists. These terrorists are only loyal to the respective government and their financial institutions. The investigative teams discovered an even more sinister plot regarding this controlling shadow government, the Supreme Court, and its entire U.S. judicial administration. The United States has been infiltrated by foreign and domestic enemies and threaten what is left of our Constitution and our Republic. The foreign nationals are embedded inside our state governments, our federal government, the Supreme Court, Congress, and the Senate. These criminals currently hold multiple positions of power in our government. They are being paid multiple salaries and possess the authority to control false flag events and create illegal laws in state and federal legislature and senatorial venues. They are using the now illegal Supreme Court as oversight of issues that have reshaped our nation as a free republic, of which is currently being held hostage by foreign enemies and are creating the Fourth Reich. George Soros's, aka David Rockefeller's, MoveOn.org are financing nationwide demonstrations to create believable fake scenarios for testing martial law by using fake riots, shootings, and college campus disruptions. In addition, free speech is being censored and suppressed. This shadow government has hired an army of federally funded, criminal-minded, and powerful persons to act as disinformation agents. These agents troll social media and internet sites. They write and make videos that are harassing, oppressive, abusive, and provide disinformation and use belittling commentary as a tool to cause suppression and dissension amongst the media patriots and the public in an attempt to sway new readers in the wrong direction. On this channel and on our websites, the individuals engaging in this behavior are enemies of our Constitution and the Republic. They too will be prosecuted with this shadow government. These individuals will be exploited to the public by the Citizens Intelligence Agency. This is a warning to any shills, trolls, and COINTEL disinformation agents and any and all constitutional enemies. We know who you are. Leave the United States now or suffer the legal consequences. Our code name is Operation Phoenix Rising. We are an additional force of 20 investigative teams. We are 100 plus strong and growing. Our sole purpose is to uncover, expose, and prosecute all enemies, both foreign and domestic. The number of enemies that are currently embedded in our state and federal governments is very troubling. This agency will reveal any findings of wrongdoing by rebroadcasting truth from the citizens of the United States and around the world. Doing so will provide answers regarding these false flags and will expose those in our shadow government who are truly orchestrating these acts of terrorism upon the people. We will expose all who now control the shadow government, including our current president and his administration. This channel is dedicated to every YouTube patriot, truther, birther, millennium, and professional journalist, of which the mainstream propaganda media machine have called amateurs. In contrast, the alternative media journalists, and in particular, the YouTube media patriots, are the dominant, true media sources for our republic. If you would like to join our team and have skills for uncovering the truth about our enemies, then please obtain the contact information at the end of this video. Join us. We are anonymous. We are 100 plus strong. We don't forgive. We don't forget. We need good men and women to become a citizens intelligence agent. After a legal vetting process of your background, we want you as a special agent. As a special agent in the Citizens Intelligence Agency, you will become an elite member and will be a messenger of truth and justice for all.
Arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death!
Hello, initiates, and welcome to Module 1 of the IllumiCorp video training course. I would like to officially welcome you as a member of the team. You've joined our organization at perhaps the most exciting point in our long history. Our founders shared a passionate dream to transform this country and eventually the whole world into one cohesive organization. When IllumiCorp finishes gaining centralized control over the resources of the planet, and we will, we can then organize, distribute, and govern for the benefit of all. After competition and dissent are eliminated, we will build a utopia for the people of the world to share based on need and rejoice together in a harmonious new world. This presentation is designed to enlighten you about our organization's goals and achievements. As your guide, I will help to answer some basic questions you might have about IllumiCorp and familiarize you with the valuable role you will play in helping us reach our prime objective. So please, take a tour with me as we march together towards an exciting new world. All people are aware of class. To them, society is made up of the rich, the middle, and the poor.
The one thing that all three classes don't understand is that the pyramid continues upward. There is a detached hidden capstone made up of an elite board of directors who own and manage IllumiCorp. The three classes below, in essence, become the assets and resources of IllumiCorp. IllumiCorp is divided into various administrative branches, but each branch has the same 5 levels in their hierarchy. You will begin at the bottom, in the Initiate category. As such, your role will be to make sure that your orders are carried out through the sub-corporations and institutions controlled by IllumiCorp.
You will be placed in plain sight, at the head of a company or institution in the public sector, to carry out the plans delivered from above. Remember, your role is very important. You will be the face of IllumiCorp to the outside world. You are our connection to the masses below. Never speak publicly about your orders or your masters. Now let's look at IllumiCorp's 6 administrative branches and their functions. You will be placed in a top position of power among one of the following sectors. In this way, as you are monitored and guided from above, you will decide strategy and introduce programs that further our goals. But that is the secret to IllumiCorp's success. Control the head, and you control the body. This is potentially IllumiCorp's most effective instrument for global control. Through international banking, we manipulate the fate of all countries. We have introduced many institutions, such as the IMF and WTO, that work in our favor to impoverish disobedient nations. Always remember, debt is a powerful weapon against countries that don't share IllumiCorp's vision.
Perhaps our greatest achievement in banking is the Federal Reserve System. It is a collection of international banks owned by IllumiCorp members and financiers. It was created to form a centralized banking system through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 an act that was indeed penned by some of our most esteemed members. Many of you might still assume that the government itself prints and issues the currency. That is not the case. When America needs money, they go to our boys and ask for it. The money is printed, but it is only representative of a loan. Interest accrues on that dollar until it is paid back to the Fed. In fact, the federal taxes paid by the American population go almost entirely to paying off this debt. So you see, Illumicorp derives a healthy amount of its operation funding directly from the debt of the public. Needless to say, this is one of our most crucial sources of funding, and one of our proudest achievements here at Illumicorp. Through mergers and acquisitions, we have slowly and silently bought up the majority of U.S. industry. Illumicorp and its members own most of the oil, transport, banking, media, food and communications industries in America and abroad. Through fewer and fewer conglomerates, we are able to effect with great precision the machinations of labor and government.
Ultimately, corporations will replace government as a centralized international body that can meet the needs of the public worldwide without the chaos created by national self-interest. When Illumicorp goes public, corporatism will be the foundation for world government. Conglomerates will merge into one cohesive corporation that is responsible only to Illumicorp and the needs of its global employment force. Illumicorp's control of the American military is another impressive tool in our possession. We have nurtured these institutions lavishly to serve as the prototype for our global police force. When ready, our technology and manpower will dominate those who oppose the coming new world order.
By utilizing American patriotism, we have fostered in the American soldier the philosophy of peace through superior force. When the time is right, we will migrate that mentality towards the belief in a global government who must protect all people through superior force. We have used the American military-industrial complex to build the arsenal necessary to instigate the final cleansing outlined in Illumicorp's great plan. Our primary target will be Islamic nations who will never submit to our Western-centric domination. They also hold much of the remaining oil reserve of the planet. Illumicorp must own that precious resource, as it is crucial in maintaining our domination over the countries of the world.
Through Illumicorp's enormous federal funding of the military, we can develop new forms of warfare and population reduction. The public can't imagine what we were in the process of developing. Soon, even the weather will be a weapon under our control. We will be able to create droughts, floods, hurricanes, and even tsunamis with no fingerprints attached. The political system of America has been under direct control of Illumicorp for some time. It was actually a relatively easy acquisition, and has been even easier to manage. Politicians know of our unspoken agreement, and will do anything to stay in power.
A two-party system benefits Illumicorp, in that it reduces all issues into a black and white debate. Through media, we can play side against side, using each where necessary to support our goals. Due to a diminishing faith in the system among the public, Illumicorp has designed a rogue candidate program to provide a voice for the dispossessed. This disperses the impetus for dissent among those who do not feel represented by our candidates and builds a database of potential dissidents.
At the turn of the last century, Illumicorp took a serious interest in public education. Our Supreme Council realized that by creating a private organization to dictate curriculum on a federal level, children could be conditioned to obedience on a mass scale.
In the interest of promoting Illumicorp principles in the classroom, hundreds of millions of dollars were invested to create the General Education Board in 1902. The result of doing this is evident today. The doctrines of public education have transformed recent generations into a weaker, more docile mass. Through meticulously planned curriculum, we have control over the process by which the average child learns. Thus we can mold them into obedient workers who are conditioned to accept the implementation of the Great Plan. In addition, Illumicorp has set up many associations, including the American Historical Association, that determine and uphold the official view of history. Knowledge is power, so we must at all costs be the authors of the truth. By writing history to suit our interests, dissenting voices cannot gain ground, and we can vastly influence culture to achieve our prime objective.
Illumicorp uses the media to shape the public's opinion about current events and condition desired attitudes about our future agenda. Through news, entertainment, and advertising, we can program a variety of emotions and responses into the collective unconscious.
In the past, we were limited entirely to print media, but now we have multiple mediums to utilize in programming and conditioning the masses. With cable news, we have directed the public to a more entertainment-based consumption of world events, infotainment. This medium is far more effective at subliminal reinforcement of desired attitudes towards our objectives. For instance, we are currently instilling a sense of duty towards environmental issues.
With our growing control of the weather through HARP and chemtrails, we will scare the public into accepting our global protection agendas. We will then phase into the great cleansing which must occur to return the global population to a manageable size.
We reinforce the desired norm through advertising, creating a model for people to live up to that is virtually impossible. The result is an incomplete, desperate individual seeking acceptance. Through reality television game shows, we repeat the pattern of individual survival versus group survival. This breaks down the idea of community and breeds individuals who seek only their self-interest. With a public that is constantly suspicious and scheming, we maintain the status quo of a divided population that never thinks to look up.
Religion has served its purpose incredibly well. It is the oldest and perhaps the broadest form of social control utilized by Illumicorp. With religion, there is a written code of conduct that must be followed. The authors of the Holy Scriptures knew quite well how to lace that code with commands to maintain their dominance over the population. This system has survived through millennia to hold the flock together and bring us to today.
Admittedly, religion is losing its power for control. However, the fanaticism that has arisen due to this decline is particularly helpful to Illumicorp. Our invisible influence in the Church has helped bring the Christian fundamentalists out of the background. We control their opinions on current issues through policies designed and written right here at Illumicorp headquarters. They are sent to our ministers, who then preach the Word of God and their interpretations of the Bible to their followers. Their blind faith is used to transform them into willing soldiers to defend our cause during the catastrophes ahead. As the final phase is enacted, we will propagate end-time prophecy to convince them of their convictions.
The rise of Islamic fundamentalism works to Illumicorp's advantage as a threat that will demand violent action. In the coming years, planned terrorist attacks will warrant a full-scale retaliation and initiate the final phase of the Great Plan. Christians will support our actions, since they will believe them to be proof of the end times prophesied by Illumicorp's religious leaders. Now that you have a basic understanding of how we work over here at IllumiCorp, I would like to introduce you to one of our latest projects, the Control Grid. Since ancient times, it has been the desire of the Illumins to wield control of the masses below, both to protect us from them and them from themselves. The tools through the ages have been effective, but always blunt and inaccurate. But now, with the release of new technology to the masses, we have the real ability to implement a control grid with finance, industry, government, and military under our strict control. We can safely ship the population into a new world, monitored and controlled by IllumiCorp.
Technology such as the Internet, GPS, and RFID chips are pillars of the invisible prison we are erecting around the people. Within the decade, we will have real ID cards that contain criminal records and pertinent information, all linked to federal databases. Cell phones will tell us where each individual is, linked to the same database. Through intelligence agencies and Homeland Security, we will monitor individuals who oppose the Great Plan and remove them from the grid. Quickly, the population will learn that they have a choice: support the system and benefit from its luxuries, or reject it and lose access to the grid.
Well, that was quite an overview. I hope it gave you an understanding of our process and basic overall structure here at IllumiCorp. Don't worry if you can't remember specific details at the moment. Once assigned to your administrative branch, you will be shown the second IllumiCorp training module. Your initiate supervisor will brief you on your specific duties at that point.
Also, please review your copy of the Great Plan and the attached code word and symbols booklet. You will need to know the ways we communicate internally through public channels.
This concludes part 1 of the IllumiCorp video training module. I wish you the best of luck, and may our plan complete in secrecy. The dawn of a new era is on the horizon, and it will shine gloriously over the new world that we have built together.
It is important to note, Nazi Germany's war effort was largely supported by two organizations, one of which was called IG Farben. IG Farben produced 84% of Germany's explosives. One of the unspoken partners of IG Farben was J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company in America. In fact, the German Air Force could not operate without a special additive patented by Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The drastic bombing of London by Nazi Germany, for example, was made possible by a $20 million sale of fuel to IG Farben by the Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. This is just one small point on the topic of how American businesses funded both sides of World War II. One other treasonous organization worth mentioning is the Union Banking Corporation of New York City. Not only did they finance numerous aspects of Hitler's rise to power, along with actual materials during the war, it was also a Nazi money laundering bank, which was eventually exposed for having millions of dollars of Nazi money in its vaults. The Union Banking Corporation of New York was eventually seized for violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Guess who the director and vice president of the Union Bank was? Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of former U.S. Presidents George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush.
What do we really know about our elected leaders, including our presidents? How much do we really know about their personal backgrounds and their family histories? For instance, did you know that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of our current president George W. Bush, ran a bank and other Manhattan-based organizations that were actually front companies for the Nazis? U.S. Senator Prescott Bush sat on the board of the Union Banking Corporation. This and other Manhattan-based organizations were actually nest eggs for German industrialist Fritz Thyssen. Thyssen was the main financier for the Nazis. He later published the autobiography, I Paid Hitler. Even after America had entered World War II, Bush and the Union Banking Corporation continued doing business with the Third Reich. After the start of America's intervention in the war, the U.S. government seized the holdings of the Union Banking Corporation and other Nazi-affiliated companies associated with Prescott Bush. Later, however, with the profits and contacts gained from this venture, Prescott Bush created the Bush family fortune, jump-started his own political career as a U.S. Senator, and established the Bush family dynasty. Prescott Bush was also involved with a steel company that used Nazi slave labor from the concentration camps. 2 Holocaust survivors recently sued the U.S. government and the Bush family for $40 billion, claiming the Bush dynasty benefited from Auschwitz slave labor during World War II. Many New Yorkers may not be aware that 3 of the former Bush Nazi holding companies had offices in Lower Manhattan, including the Union Banking headquarters at 39 Broadway.
I've been an investigative reporter and a journalist for 35 years. I've worked in every major media market in the United States, and I've written for more than 100 newspapers and magazines nationally and internationally. So last September 17th, I became the first journalist in U.S. history to go to the U.S. National Archives and the Library of Congress and pore over the thousands of pages of documents in both places to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt or any refutation of the facts that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. 2 weeks ago, in early August, a major world newspaper, The Guardian of London, finally got on the story internationally, and they flew a renowned reporter of theirs named Duncan Campbell over to Washington to take me back to the archives and Library of Congress so that they could verify that these explosive documents were real and I didn't have forged copies. Prescott Bush was the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Herbert Walker Bush is named for his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. Prescott Bush graduated from Yale in 1917 and was in Skull and Bones with E. Roland Harriman, who was the younger brother of W. Averill Harriman. The Bush family really had nothing going. They were essentially social climbers and opportunistic people. At the time that Prescott Bush met Dorothy Walker, he was a tire salesman. And George Herbert Walker, as all fathers do when their daughter's going to marry someone, said in his heart, you know, it's not an appropriate thing socially that my daughter marry a tire salesman. So he brought Prescott Bush first into Brown Brothers Harriman and then Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. They owned a shipping line called Hamburg American Line, for example, which was the first Nazi front business seized, although the line was no longer operational in 1942. In the early 1930s, it transported Nazi spies into the U.S., and then their promotional ads offered cash rewards to any American citizens who would go back on Hamburg American Lines and proselytize for Hitler. 8 months after the U.S. had entered the war, the New York Herald Tribune ran a front-page article, Hitler's Angel has $3 million in U.S. bank. And it caused a major scandal and just rocked the world of politics. Brown Brothers Harriman, which George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush were affiliated with and partners in, worked with IG Farben, which operated Auschwitz. Prescott Bush He did a number of things that were not only anti-American, but were pro-Hitler, and he did all that he could to proselytize for Hitler and the rise of his Third Reich, because the largest client, Fritz Thyssen, of his patron, W. Averill Harriman, dictated what kind of behavior he would practice to enhance his own career. So he was put on the board of directors of Union Banking Corporation, and he was also a shareholder in Union Banking Corporation along with E. Roland Harriman. But what's interesting about what the documents show is that they clearly state that all of the shareholders were phantom shareholders for Fritz Thyssen and did his bidding directly. So the point I'm making is it's not as if they bought these shares of stock as a passive investment to hopefully profit from the war. They were directly doing the bidding of the individual who built the Nazi war machine. Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th. On August 9th, excuse me, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934. Show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, and Panama, and they had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thyssen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben. In 1951, when Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes. George Bush doesn't take his philosophical foundation from the Bible or the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. George Bush takes his inspiration from what he learned in Skull and Bones and from the Thule Society that Hitler and Goebbels and Goring cut their teeth in, Bohemian Grove, these evil organizations that perpetrate the ugly things that these criminals are doing to this country for which they must be held accountable. Now you look at the Republican National Convention this week, and you bring in Arnold Schwarzenegger to speak last night. Schwarzenegger is the son of a Nazi. He has praised Nazis. He has praised Hitler. He talked last night in terms like, we will not falter, we will not waver, we will win this war on terror.
He's a leader who doesn't flinch, who doesn't waver, and does not back down.
Well, that's exactly the speeches that Hitler made after the Reichstag fire. Terrorism and the homeland being under attack are precisely the issues that Hitler used to subvert everything within the German system of government. This is a criminal regime They not only emulate Hitler, but its genesis comes from Hitler. And I defy anyone, a historian, journalist, author, anyone, to come forward and disprove my premise that you cannot differentiate Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939 and the Reichstag fire and his attempt to dominate the world from George W. Bush's unprovoked invasion of Iraq and subversion of the Constitution through the Patriot Act after 9/11, which I submit is his Reichstag fire. Karl Rove and his minions are every bit the masters of propaganda that Joseph Goebbels was. They literally took lessons from Goebbels and Goring about how to create such brilliant propaganda that unreality can become reality, and reality can be subverted to fantasy political subterfuge right before your eyes.
On the 21st of November 1934, the following rather chilling article appeared in the New York Times. It concerns the discovery of a planned coup that could have altered the course of American history, yet today hardly anyone knows anything about it.
A plot of Wall Street interests to overthrow President Roosevelt and establish a fascist dictatorship backed by a private army of 500,000 ex-soldiers and others appeared before the House of Representatives Committee on Un-American Activities, which began hearings on the charges.
If these long-forgotten accounts can be relied on, I seem to be looking at an attempt to set up a fascist government in the land of the free. A coup that could have toppled one of America's most revered presidents, paved the way for a possible alliance with Italy and Germany, and thereby change the complexion of World War II.
Fascism was seen as an example to be learned from, because it seemed like a quick fix. All you needed to do was get people to shape up.
You could have had a handful of the wealthiest people in the United States found guilty of treason and sentenced to death.
But just what was this plot? Who were the Wall Street interests? Or was this nothing more than a moment of paranoia from a national media not renowned for its self-restraint? Well, the answers to some of these questions may have to wait until I can get my hands on the bulk of the evidence, documents detailing evidence heard behind closed doors by a congressional committee. But I already have the official statement released by that committee when it reported back to Congress. Its members clearly had no doubt that a fascist coup was in the offing.
In the last few weeks of the committee's official life, it received evidence showing that certain persons had made an attempt to establish a fascist organization in this country. There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient.
So, such a plot, backed by powerful people, was waiting in the wings. That much is very clear. But how did it come to this? Well, it all happened during one of the bleakest moments in US history.
They used to tell me I was building a dream.
The America of 1933 was in the teeth of the Great Depression, a time of extreme poverty, desperation, and the barren plains of the grapes of wrath.
Brother, can you spare a dime?
I see millions of families trying to live on income so meager that the pall of family disaster hangs over them day by day.
Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
The Great Depression is not called the Great Depression in this country by accident.
Michael Kazin is professor of history at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
It was the deepest and the longest economic downturn in American history. As many as 1/3 of the labor force was unemployed in the early 1930s especially. Really the core of the industrial economy was all but shut down.
Say, buddy, can you spare a dime?
All of this added to a sense that American society was coming apart, not just the economy. People no longer had much faith in the authorities at any level, economic or political.
Yet the image of those days we've been left with is not social unrest, fascism and treasonous plots, but one of dignified suffering and resilient faith in the American dream. No one illustrated that better than President Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose New Deal reforms promised jobs, pride and fresh hope to ordinary Americans.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
FDR's New Deal policies brought an increase in public work programs, more help for the poor, and the removal of the dollar from the gold standard. Yet while history remembers FDR as a visionary saviour in America's hour of need, some at the time saw him in a very different light.
There were major elements in the business community that hated Roosevelt, and they hated Roosevelt out of all proportion to the scale of the measures that he had actually brought in.
Professor Tony Badger is Master of Clare College, Cambridge, and author of several books on Roosevelt's New Deal.
These were businessmen who essentially thought that Roosevelt was putting America on the wrong road in a big way in 1933, and that it was setting the federal government up as a sort of arbiter and enforcer and intervener in the American economy in a way that they were deeply afraid of.
Such powerful enemies had been made within 100 days of FDR taking office in 1933.
The businessmen were also aware that out in the country there were demagogues who were making really popular, apparently radical-sounding appeals, and they were always worried that Roosevelt was unleashing these forces, would encourage these, what they thought of as crackpots, to wreak havoc.
The right wing in America wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. It's into this world that the plot to overthrow FDR was born. But who was going to lead it, and how did they think they'd get away with it? I'm hoping the answers lie amongst the formerly secret papers of the Congressional Committee that investigated the planned coup. These, I'm told, are locked away in the National Archives of America. It was established to investigate the activities of fascist sympathizers in the US in the early years of Roosevelt's presidency.
It's a very small amount. Only, 4.5 boxes for what they did in executive session.
So it doesn't look that much, and there's even less than it looks.
For what the committee investigated and how much testimony they heard, yes, I mean, it's a very small amount.
Despite the paucity of documents, there are some that catch my eye.
Starts with some interesting disputes between the General and the committee. The Chairman, General, you are a retired Commandant of the Marine Corps.
The most important testimony in these records is from a senior commander of the US Marines, Major General Smedley Butler.
I was in the Marine Corps 33 years and 4 months on the active list.
Major General Butler came before the committee of his own free will. He had, he said, been contacted by a well-connected New York City broker called Gerald Maguire. Maguire met Butler a number of times and slowly revealed his audacious plan. He and his financial backers wanted Butler, a highly decorated war hero, hugely respected by rank-and-file soldiers, to rouse an army of World War I veterans, many of whom were angry that a bonus they'd been promised had yet to be paid. The idea was that the general would use these men to help seize the White House, just like Hitler and Mussolini had used their private armies to bully their way into power. At the time, Butler, a staunch defender of democracy, went along with the plan, but he was secretly appalled. Inside the National Archives, I was joined by writer John Buchanan, who has made a study of right-wing America in the 1930s.
These super wealthy capitalists essentially wanted to pose such a threat to Roosevelt that he would basically step aside. If FDR would not cooperate and step aside, they would execute him, kill him.
Smedley Butler's testimony shows the plot was at an advanced stage.
Maguire said to me, I went abroad to study the part that the veterans play in the various setups of the governments that they have abroad, like France. And I found just exactly the organization we're going to have. It is an organization of 500,000 super soldiers here in America. Well, I said, I suppose you get these 500,000 men in America. What are you going to do with them? He said, did it ever occur to you that the president is overworked? We might have an assistant president. He went on to say that the position would be a Secretary of General Affairs, a sort of super secretary. He said, you know the American people will swallow that. We have got the newspapers. We will start a campaign that the president's health is failing. Everybody can tell that by looking at him, and the dumb American people will fall for it in a second.
Now in his 90s, Jules Archer was a young man of 18 when General Smedley Butler gave his testimony. He remembers just how idolized the man still was by the tens of thousands of veterans who'd been under his command.
He was a fantastic anti-war general. He was very popular with the soldiers and sailors. He fought for them, and he fought for their rights. That was one of the reasons he was selected for the plot, because they knew he could raise a paramilitary army of veterans who would follow him because they believed in him.
It was here at the Association of the Bar in central New York City, just a stone's throw from Wall Street, that the case against the plotters came to a head. One of the most important witnesses who came here was Paul Cumley French, a journalist Smedley Butler took into his confidence after the conspirators had tried to recruit him. French had also met chief plotter Gerald Maguire at his Wall Street offices, and he recounted their conversation to the committee.
We need a fascist government in this country, he insisted, to save the nation from the communists who want to tear it down and wreck all that we have built in America. The only men who have the patriotism to do it are the soldiers, and Smedley Butler is the ideal leader. He could organize 1 million men overnight. During the course of the conversation, he continually discussed the need of a man on a white horse, as he called it, a dictator who would come galloping in on his white horse. He said that was the only way, to save the capitalistic system.
But it was Smedley Butler, war hero and soldier's friend, who exposed the plot. He continued his meetings with Maguire until he gathered enough information on the plotters to bring the evidence before the McCormack-Dickstein Committee. And the central character of the plot, the plain-speaking Major General Smedley Butler, was caught on early newsreel from the time, explaining his part in exposing the plot.
I talked with an investigator for this committee. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institution.
So Smedley Butler remained adamant that he was the target of a fascist plot, and there was never any doubt either in the mind of committee chairman John McCormack that the forces of fascism were gathering to storm the White House. But who was going to fund the coup? Even with the backing of 500,000 veterans, a plot of this sort against the most powerful government on earth needs money as well as muscle, and an awful lot of it too. Well, according to Smedley Butler, this was where the big business moguls and Wall Street brokers behind the coup came in. They, he was told by Maguire, would soon step out of the shadows in the form of a newly created lobby group. Soon after he made this promise to Butler, the American Liberty League was born.
Maguire said, well, you're going to see in the next few weeks in the press, this organization is going to be created that's going to front for the whole thing, and we're going to stand up for the Constitution, and we're going to stand up for our troops, and so on. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, splashed all over the major newspapers of the time, especially in New York and Washington, the creation of the American Liberty League.
It's a matter of record that the membership of the American Liberty League included some of the most famous names in business. Its benefactors read like a who's who of household products that are still familiar today. General Foods, the makers of Maxwell House coffee, Birdseye and Colgate, Heinz Foods, US Steel and car manufacturer General Motors were all supporters of the League. The treasurer of this organisation was the broker Grayson Murphy. Little research has revealed that he was none other than the boss of the man at the centre of the plot allegations, Gerald Maguire. Later in the McCormack-Dickstein report, a shipping company called Hamburg America Line was accused of providing free passage to Germany to American journalists willing to write favourable copy on Hitler's rise to power. The company is also alleged to have brought Nazi spies and pro-fascist sympathisers into America. John Buchanan has studied this later section of the report and has discovered that one of the company's managers came from a very famous family.
The thing that surprised me most was to discover in the documents that this company, Hamburg America Lines, had in fact been managed on the U.S. side at the executive level by Prescott Bush as part of a web of Nazi business interests that were all seized in late 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act by the U.S. Congress, and Prescott Bush is the grandfather of the sitting President of the United States.
Of course, at the time, it was perfectly legal to have dealings with Hitler's Germany. Prescott Bush was not called to account for this until America entered the war. Neither was it a crime to be a member of a lobby group like the Liberty League, and have found no firm evidence that the Liberty League itself was behind the plot to overthrow their country's democratically elected president. But academics like Professor Tony Badger believes that it was, at the very least, a magnet for those with such intentions. But yet again, the evidence is hard to find. You'd have thought that if there was any linking leading American industrialists of the day to a plot against the president, I'd be able to find it at the National Archives in Washington. Yet when John Buchanan and I leafed through the rather thin files there, we found no direct reference to any of these people. Though I'm now starting to wonder whether any such evidence has been removed or deliberately withheld from the records in the first place. General Butler seemed to have harboured similar suspicions. After the investigating committee published its findings, he accused its members of deliberately editing out of his testimony the names of top business people who he had linked to the plot. On the 17th of February 1935, just after the committee had published its findings, he had this to say on Radio WCAU.
Like most committees, it has slaughtered the little and allowed the big to escape. The big shots weren't even called to testify. They were all mentioned in the testimony. Why was all mention of these names suppressed from the testimony?
The co-chairman, Samuel Dickstein, admits that the papers were censored, but insisted that this was for a very good reason.
The testimony given by General Butler was kept confidential until such time as the names of the persons who were mentioned could be checked upon and verified. This accounts for the fact that when the results of the hearings were made public, references were omitted.
That argument would have seemed fair enough if names had later been checked and verified. Yet most of the senior figures implicated in General Smedley Butler's evidence were never asked to appear before the committee to answer the questions raised. Even though, had the allegations against them been found to be true, people like Irene DuPont and banker J.P. Morgan could have faced the death sentence for treason.
The investigations mysteriously turn to vapor when it comes time to call them to testify. FDR's main interest was getting the New Deal passed. And so he struck a deal in which it was agreed that the plotters would walk free if Wall Street would back off of their opposition to the New Deal and let FDR do what he wanted.
John Buchanan. With their cover blown, it seems likely that the plotters and their wealthy backers had little option but to accept such a deal and return to the business they knew best, making money.
There were little warning signs, but few were paying attention when George H.W. Bush the Poppy ran for president in 1988 and 1992. First, during the campaign, it surfaced that one of his campaign staffers was a distributor of pro-Nazi propaganda. Before the ink was dry on the individual's resignation, Further revelations showed there were in fact a number of ex-Nazis on Bush's campaign staff, including Laszlo Pastor and Jaroslav Stetsko. Pastor was a member of the Hungarian Arrow Cross during World War II and served as an envoy to Germany. The Arrow Cross was known to be excessively brutal even to their Nazi allies. Stetsko served as the prime minister of the short-lived Ukrainian puppet government. During the short reign of this puppet regime, over 100,000 Jews were slaughtered in Lvov. George H.W. Bush's insensitivity towards victims of the Holocaust is underlined by his employment of Fred Malik, a well-known collaborator with former Nazis, in both his presidential campaigns. Upon winning the presidential race, George H.W. Bush, the Poppy, placed his assets in a blind trust headed by his close friend William Stamps Farish III. That appointment should have triggered alarm bells that something very dark and sinister is buried in the Bush family's past. His grandfather William Stamps Farish sold the Japanese the gasoline used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Likewise, the elder Farish supplied Hitler's war machine with oil and tetraethyl lead. George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott, was close friends with the elder Farish and remained so even after the elder's testimony before Congress provoked Harry Truman to cry out, "This is treason." In fact, during the war, Prescott had 3 companies seized from him for trading with the Nazis. To understand the web of intrigue and follow the money from the Holocaust to the Bush family, we need to start with the period immediately surrounding World War I. By 1916, August Tyson could see that Germany had already lost the Great War and he needed to protect his fortune. His eldest son had been groomed to run the family steel business in the Ruhr. His second son Heinrich discreetly changed his citizenship from German to Hungarian and married the Hungarian aristocrat Baroness Margaret Bornemisza de Caution. Near the end of the war, August Tyson opened the Bank Voorhandel en Schifvaart in Rotterdam. Holland was a neutral country during the war, and the new bank would serve as the perfect location to launder funds from the Tyson Bank in Berlin and protect his fortune from Allied financial demands. At the end of the war, Heinrich, now going by the name of Baron Tyson Bornemisza de Caution, moved to Rotterdam and became the principal owner of the Bank Voorhandel en Schifvaart. All that remained to be done in August Tyson's plan was to set up an American bank. In 1922, Averell Harriman traveled to Germany to set up a branch of W.A. Harriman in Berlin. Harriman had hired George Herbert Walker, George H.W. Bush's grandfather, to run both the New York and Berlin branches of his expanding investment firm. During his stay in Germany, Harriman had met the Tyson family and agreed to help the Tysons set up an American bank. In 1923, Germany was in economic shambles and Tyson met with his friend General Ludendorff, who advised him that Germany's hope lied with Hitler and the Nazi Party. Tyson soon became a financial backer of the Nazis and Hitler. Early in 1924, Hendrik J. Kuenhoven, the managing director of Bank Voorhandel en Schifvaart, traveled to New York. Meeting with Walker and the Harriman brothers, they founded the Union Banking Corporation. In 1926, August Tyson died. The eldest son Fritz expanded the Tyson empire by creating United Steel Works. Tyson also brought Frederick Flick on board. The Tyson-Flick Union was designed to suppress the Union movement. As a result of the merger of Tyson and Flick, George Walker hired his son-in-law, Prescott Bush, to manage the United Steel Works account. One division of United Steel Works consisted of both Consolidated Silesian Steel Corporation and the Upper Silesian Coal and Steel Company. Both were located in the mineral-rich Silesian area of Poland. The arrangement was extremely profitable for all four men: Tyson, Flick, Walker and Bush, until the Depression started in 1929. Congressional investigations after the war showed that United Steel had supplied 50.8% of the pig iron to Nazi Germany and likewise was a major supplier of all other ferrous-based metal products needed by Hitler's war machine. Hence, one of the largest munitions makers in Nazi Germany was funded by Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of two future U.S. presidents. Due to the Depression, Harriman merged with Brown, forming the Brown Brothers and Harriman firm. Internally, the stock of Consolidated Silesian Steel Company was held by the Harriman 15 Corporation, formed by Harriman and Bush. 2/3 of the stock was owned by Flick. By 1934, With Hitler in solid control of Germany, the profits from the Thyssen-Flick Union soared to over 100 million. Both Union Bank and the Bank Boerhandel en Schifvaart were overflowing with money. Prescott Bush became managing director of Union Bank and took over the day-to-day operations of the German plan. In 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, ending a dispute over taxes between Consolidated and the Polish government. The Nazis' original plan was to replace the workers in Polish factories with Soviet prisoners. However, that portion of the Hitler-Stalin agreement was never implemented. Consolidated Silesian Steel Corporation was located near the Polish town of Aussie. When the plan to use Soviet prisoners as forced labor fell through, the Nazis began shipping Jews, communists, gypsies and other minority populations to the camp the Nazis had set up. This was the beginning of Auschwitz. The reason Auschwitz was located there was because of the abundant supplies of coal which could be processed into aviation fuel. IG Farben soon built a plant near Auschwitz to take advantage of not only of the nearby coal deposits but also of the slave labor supply available at Auschwitz. According to a Dutch intelligence agent, Prescott Bush managed a portion of the slave labor force in Poland. Thyssen and Flick sold Consolidated Steel to UBC. Under the complete control of Harriman and Bush's management, the company became Silesian American Corporation, which became part of UBC and Harriman's portfolio of 15 corporations. As the 1930s progressed and it became clearer that war was imminent, Bush and Harriman hired the Dulles brothers to conceal the Nazi money and ownership in Union Bank. In concealing the involvement of the Nazis in Union Bank, Prescott Bush and Harriman undoubtedly knew that they were already engaged in an activity that was probably illegal and certainly not in the best of interests of their country. Once war broke out, however, Bush's activities on the behalf of the Nazis through union banking became tantamount to treason. The reader should understand that the concealing of Nazis' assets located in the United States through a maze of corporate shells often based in Switzerland was an integral part of the German battle plan. In fact, the Nazi had a word for it: tarnum, or to camouflage. The primary aim of these concealed Nazi corporations was to wage economic warfare by creating production bottlenecks for their adversary. The reader should also be aware that 2 Americans were present during the secret meeting of the German elite that brought Hitler to power. Those 2 Americans were John Foster and Allen Dulles. 2 of the directors of Union Banking, Groninger and Kooyenhoven, were Nazi directors of the Bank Boerhandel en Schifvaart, formerly the Von Heydt Bank. Von Heydt was also a Nazi and has been identified as the intermediary between the Guarani Trust and Adolf Hitler. Both Groninger and Kooyenhoven contributed lavishly to Himmler's circle of friends. There were over 40 firms around Auschwitz using slave labor from the death camp. Soon the Nazis had a massive store of gold from dental fillings, glasses and jewelry. The Nazis extracted the fillings of its victims after being informed by Degussa that the company could refine it into marketable gold bullion. Degussa was awarded an exclusive contract with the Nazis to refine all gold. The company was also joint owners with IG Farben of Dagesh, a firm that produced Zyklon B cyanide tablets used in the gas chambers. Due to the hoard of gold fillings stacking up at Auschwitz, Degussa built a smelter there. The bullion was then shipped back to Berlin and commingled with the Nazis' gold stash. Undoubtedly some of it made its way back to the banker in charge of United Steel Works, Prescott Bush. October 20, 1942, the United States government seized union banking under the Trading with the Enemy Act. During that summer, the New York Tribune had exposed Bush and Thyssen, whom it called Hitler's angel. Union Bank's books revealed a myriad of Nazi money and holding companies. Officials realized they had only scratched the tip of the iceberg. On November 17, 1942, the government seized Silesian American Corporation and placed its operation under the Government Alien Property Custodian Office. Following the war, authorities seeking to locate the Dutch royal family's jewelry discovered the transaction papers of the Silesian American Corporation in the books of Bank Boerhandel en Schifvaart. The bank manager, H.J. Kooyenhoven, came under intense scrutiny and was shocked by the discovery. Soon Kooyenhoven traveled to New York to inform Prescott Bush. Dutch authorities date the meeting as soon after Christmas 1947. 2 weeks later, the otherwise healthy Dutch banker died of a heart attack. Coincidentally, this was the method of choice of the Gehlen network for liquidating people. The Nazis had perfected a method of inducing heart attacks that autopsies could not detect. On February 8, 1951, Tyson died in Argentina. Following his death, the alien property custodian released the assets of the Union Banking Corporation to Brown Brothers Harriman. The remaining shareholders quietly cashed in their remaining shares. Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his share in Union Banking's blood money. This brief article has only scratched the surface of the sordid association of Prescott Bush with the Nazis, as he had yet a third company seized from him during the war. In his first run for senator, Prescott was defeated after his position within the eugenics movement was disclosed. George the Poppy has followed in his father's footsteps and retained many of the same family connections with the Nazis. For instance, as chairman of the Republican Party, he presided over the formation of the ethnic heritage groups of the Republican Party. This was a reward for the Nazi quislings from Eastern Europe for helping in the election of Nixon as president. When two or more ethnic groups were vying for control over a particular group, invariably the group with close ties to the Nazis won out. George also shows the same intense interest in population control. Perhaps it was for his beliefs in eugenics, George appointed General William Draper as his expert on population. Or perhaps it was more of a reward for past services rendered by Draper to the Bush family. Draper was the former general placed in control of the military government's economic division after the war. Draper was a rabid racist and member of the Eugenics Society. He was also a former employee of Dillon and Reed, the large Wall Street brokerage house that floated the largest German bond offerings, including one for United Steel Works. In his position as economic czar of Germany, he stopped the dismantling of an IG Farben plant and was in the ideal slot to protect his former clients that armed Hitler, including Bush. The IG Farben head office was later turned into the CIA's European headquarters. The American government continued to blackmail most West German politicians throughout the Cold War based upon their denazified pasts.
And Americans, I think, in the 30s cared more about security than they did about democracy. And so if a group of businessmen, with the help of some people, former military people or current military people, could have fairly quickly brought the economy back, created this sense of security, then yes, it is possible that they would have gotten some popular support.
America would have become a dictatorship. Democracy would be gone. America would have joined Hitler and Mussolini as a fascist triumvirate.
Perhaps the biggest remaining question is whether, had the coup gone ahead and been successful, the American people would ever have put up with a dictator in the White House.
It's critical that every citizen of this country rise up and do something, because the day of reckoning is at hand, and these people are Nazis. They are practicing Nazi philosophy. They are mimicking Nazi tactics, and time is running out.
God bless you, and may God bless America.
Many of the United States presidents have blood relations with each other. The Bush lineage has blood ties to a great number of former presidents. George Washington, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Grover Cleveland, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. Michael Tessarion points out in his work that Bush is closely related to every European monarch on and off the throne, and has kinship with every member of Britain's royal family. Bush's family tree can be documented as far back as the early 15th century. He has a direct descent from Henry III and from Henry VIII's sister Mary Tudor. He is also descended from Charles II of England. And we also find that George W. Bush is a direct descendant of Godefroy de Bouillon. Godfrey was the first king of Jerusalem after he recaptured it from the Saracens, which was the name for the Islamic faith during the Middle Ages. It is interesting to note that the current occupation of the United States in the Middle East was re-established by the same family, George Bush Sr. in 1991, and again by George Bush Jr. in 2003. George Bush Jr. is then found to be a cousin to both opposing candidates of his 2 terms in office, Al Gore and John Kerry. Democratic President Barack Obama also has blood ties with George W. Bush, as well as Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, James Madison, and the British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. On the opposing side of the 2008 presidential ballot, John McCain is descended from Robert the Bruce, King William I of Scotland, and also Godfrey the Bullion. Probably one of the most interesting facets of the bloodline relations is the fact that the whole British royal family has descent from the Muslim prophet Muhammad through the Arab kings of Seville. This bloodline was passed through the kings of Portugal, Castile, and eventually down to King Edward IV. And this is a very, very different story from what you hear the media pumping out every day, being this idea of lineal superiority. It's completely debunked according to the foremost authority of aristocratic lineage, Burke's peerage. And this just goes to show that there's the true story, and then there's the manufactured illusion, the front that's given to the public. These blood ties go on and are documented thoroughly through literature such as Burke's Peerage and other comparable books. The point of all of this is that we find not just the same people, but the same intent within the people who have held high positions of monarchy, dynasty, aristocracy, and democracy in the past and present, and they are all related by a physical and symbolic link. This bloodline carries the symbol of our illness. The symptoms of our psycho-spiritual illness are the wars, terrorist attacks, artificial or man-made disasters, and leader figures. As long as the people remain oblivious to their inner drives and inner nature, they will always fail to recognize why these events take place and why these figures rise to such powerful positions. The reason why we have failed for thousands of years to conquer these archetypal rulers permanently is because for thousands of years we have been fighting the symptoms of an illness and not the root cause. For every corrupt government that falls at the hands of a revolutionary, oppressed people, 2 more will rise in its place every time, because the root cause of a corrupt government does not exist in the individual leading that government. It exists within the psyche of every individual, because an unaware host to a deadly parasite will do anything to avoid accepting his own incapacity for freedom. We are so bereft of sanity in this world that those few who simply stop projecting onto others and begin facing their own demons are seen as neurotic. An article written in the 1950s states that studies showed that individuals who had been isolated from their familiar social and cultural environment became neurotic. This shows that when those individuals had no object to identify their darker emotions with, they began to see these things in themselves, that which they refused to recognize before, and were unaware of why they appeared and how to cope. Facing our true inner self is virtually unknown in our world today. This is why no matter how many civilizations rise and fall, it is our collective consciousness that creates our governing apparatus, not individual people. And after countless attempts, you would imagine that people would realize that a physical retaliation may not be the solution. Yet here we are, thousands of years later, with technology that can clone DNA, vehicles that can break the sound barrier and probe the depths of space, and science that can overcome almost any sickness. Yet we still fail to take notice to the importance of thoughts and consciousness. This is the very definition of insanity. And every single one of us is responsible for this psychic epidemic, because we're killing the messenger and paying no attention to the message.
Welcome to the Emergent Reality Network.
Please stand by for a public service announcement. Please be advised that you have been advised. Tomorrow has been cancelled due to the lack of interest. Thank you for your participation and humanity. The revolution will not be televised. This has been a recording.
Connection established. Begin protocol.
I want you to walk with me. I got lawyers up here, lawyers down there, politicians up here, politicians down there. Let's walk through this criminal enterprise. Walk through it. Walk through it. I gotta say, you're dealing with a criminal government here. These are criminals in power. Because I really don't care no more about what anybody thinks. If you don't have the testicular fortitude to say what needs to be said, then sit down and stop trying to say you speak for our people and the hurt of the poor. Now I close. Excuse me. I think I'm getting excited. Now, I may sound radical to you. I may sound like I've gone off a little. But I want to prove what I just said. See, these are criminals. Maybe not in your eyes, but you can't see. Right now you see your government as a tree, immovable. Strong and powerful like a tree. You don't see as you should see the Americans in the window of the Democratic store. They're dressed beautifully. They want you to try on democracy. This country don't give a damn about democracy. They're tricking you. This thing called democracy is a trick. Even right now, register to vote. Who the hell you gonna vote for? Go ahead. Who you voting for? Well, thank God. We can get rid of Bush. You mean you got hope in this corrupt political system? Do you really think that this corrupt political system is going to really serve our needs? What the hell is wrong with you? That you're going to sacrifice your children and your grandchildren on the false hope. You've been took. Like Brother Malcolm said, you've been had. You've been hoodwinked. You've been bamboozled. And you're ready to be bamboozled one more time. Not now. Come on. Clearly, something is wrong. Wrong with the government in which we live. Wrong with the leaders that lead us. Wrong with us in the way we respond to our enemy and each other. This nation is not about poor people, whether they're black, brown, red, yellow, or white. This nation is about rich people, privileged people, powerful people, and to hell with the weak, the poor. They must serve. Now, we are a universal people. But those at the top, they're on their way to hell. And if I got any power, I want to push them into hell as fast as I can.
If the crimes of this government remain unclear to you, then we would suggest you allow the 5th of November to pass unmarked. But, if you see what we see, if you feel as we feel, and if you would seek as we seek, then we ask you to stand beside us 1 year from tonight, outside the gates of government, and together we shall give them a 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgot. We all have a choice to be part of the problem or part of the solution. That choice is yours. To this end, we offer this pledge.
I pledge allegiance to dismantle the United States of the corporations, and to the profits for which they stand, one nation, in dispute, and tyranny and torture on all.
Of this, we so declare, the time has come to wage peace.
We are not afraid. We are not alone. We are everywhere. We are the future. We are the 99%. We are anonymous. We are legion. We will not forgive. We will not forget. Expect us.
End protocol. Connection terminated.
If you don't know the organization MoveOn.org, you need to, because it's a Soros foundation. It's one of many of his shadow organizations that he uses to basically fund whatever political campaigns and issues that he wants to push and whatever agendas that he has planned. This organization is not one that we want to be running anything when it has to do with our government. These are the people that are behind this recent Occupy Wall Street movement. And I will show you their faces, and I will show you that they are actors. They are from the Phoenix area, and they are a problem. Soros used about 70 millionaire and billionaire friends of his from the Phoenix, Arizona area to basically fund this whole campaign when it comes to MoveOn.org and the recent political upheaval, so we're told by the media. What you're seeing are a bunch of actors that are doing staged events in each city, and they're playing both sides of the roles. They're playing police and playing the activists. This is all fake. This is all put on, and they're using their media assets to push this agenda. I'm going to show you their faces, and since they're coming to Dallas, I think tomorrow, I want them to know that when they come here, be ready, because I'll have my team ready, and we're going to out every single one of you that are hiding behind a fake identity. We will expose every single one of you and put your faces online and who you are, and we will show the world what you're up to. So keep an eye out for these individuals, and I think it'll be an eye-opener once you see what they're doing. Let's start off with these two. They're pretty easy to identify. I think you'll agree.
Adam what? Adam Dirks. D-I-R-K-S. I didn't do anything. I was just standing there.
First thing you want to note is the blood. The fake blood on his face is way too red, but that's beside the issue here. The actors that you see that are playing both the activist and the police are Move On employees. And specifically, this one actor alone plays 3 or 4 different roles in this event, so we know it's fake. I don't have the time right now to go into detail on every one of these individuals, so I'll put the links at the bottom so you can examine them yourself. But since MoveOn.org is supposed to be here in Dallas tomorrow, I'm getting ready for that, and I'm a little bit behind schedule. So just understand that I will be doing an in-depth examination of these faces so you can see precisely what I'm talking about, that these are the individuals. But like I said, in the meantime, in the interim, I'll put the links down at the bottom of the page so you can look for yourself, and I'm sure you'll see. But remember, it only takes one of these individuals to be involved to make this thing all fake, which it is, clearly is. Now let's move on to the next one. This one's kind of funny.
That's the bank that took my parents' loan. That's the bank right there.
This guy is a great lesson in micro-expressions. Micro-expressions, for those of you that don't know, they are the reactionary expressions that you make to any given question that you can't control. They're just millisecond responses that your muscles in your face will give a telltale sign of how you really feel about that question, and you don't even realize that you're making these faces, and they're so quick that most people don't catch them, but some people can. And of course, when you can slow down the film, you have the advantage right here where you can see them. But you'll notice he goes from this extreme acting of distress to a face that where the corner of his mouth point up and he's halfway smiling, but then he catches himself. But you'll see he gives it away many times during this. Again, you can see this is another Move On employee, so they're playing both roles, you'll see, as police and as activists.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, ma'am. That's the bank that took my dad's home. That's the bank right there.
That's a micro-expression right there, where you can see it's almost a smile, then he catches himself. But these individuals are from Arizona. They are Soros-backed with about 70 other millionaire and billionaires from the Phoenix area. So you're going to hear the same phrases with the Quartzsite event as you will here. Who Street, Our Street, and the other one is going to be the whole world is watching. That's the other phrase that they were using at the Quartzsite thing. So, and I'm also going to show you that the Radiant Helix Media, which you all know if you've watched my videos from the Gabrielle Giffords event, and the owners, Brandon Lee Pittman, who played Jared Loeffner, the mugshot photograph, he's the owner of Radiant Helix Media. Well, they're here at this event, and I'll point them out in the crowd to you. They're taking video of the whole event, so it's all staged. Here we can see 2 additional MoveOn.org employees. Now, the footage that I'm using is actually from their website, from their commercial, a trailer for a movie that they're trying to produce called Move On. Clearly, these are the individuals. You'll see them play multiple roles in this event.
Get the fuck out of the way! Is this what you're about? Is this what you're about? Is this what you're about? Is this what you're about?
If you're not familiar with my other work when it comes to the Giffords event and the Pima County Sheriff Dupnick's annual awards brochures, you need to look at some of those videos. This person appears in that catalog as David Weber, but his real name is actually Cliff. He sits on the board of the Independent Film Association of Southern Arizona, and he's also co-owner of Radiant Helix Media, a company that his partner, Brandon Lee Pittman, whom you know as a Jared Lee Loeffner character, or the picture of Jared Lee Loeffner from the mugshots. Many of their acquaintances, and actually many of Brandon's associates from the Pima County College, are the individuals that you see on the news playing Jared Loeffner's girlfriends and friends from school. And since we know that Cliff's here filming, we know that Brandon's here, his co-owner. That's Brandon Lee Pittman. Now some of you might be saying, so what? Brandon's here and Cliff's here from Radiant Helix Media. Well, the point of this is that they're in disguise. as you'll see, a number of the individuals that are playing roles in this event are in. Now, if this was a real event, if you were going to be a real activist, you wouldn't be in disguise playing parts and roles, and some of them playing even police. So this shows that it's a fraud. Again, another MoveOn.org employee. This one, though, is facing the opposite direction of the crowd, and she's giving the crowd cues with her hands, so letting them know what to do, how to act. The interesting thing about this individual is that we've seen her before. She was actually at the Gabrielle Giffords stage shooting, and she was working that event for a company called Epic Production. Epic is the video and film production company that actually has an office 2 blocks away from the Gabrielle Giffords fake shooting. They are the ones that Pima County sheriffs use to film their raids and to shoot their commercials. You can see the fake raids that I've done videos on, like the Jose Corena and the delinquent student loan raid, which all the videos are available on my YouTube account under the name Dallas Goldbug. So we see Epic employees here, we see Radiant Helix employees here, or owners here. So we know that this is a staged event, and it's going to be follow the same guidelines as what they've done with all the other staged events, either be Quartzsite with Jennifer Jones, or any of the other fake staged shootings that we see across our news that we believe are real. And yet another MoveOn employee playing the role of an activist. And another MoveOn employee. You notice he barely puts any pressure on this guy's neck, so you know it's all fake. And notice how lightly he holds his hands when you see him flip over. It's all put on, it's all show. And another. As we can see here with the smiling arrest, these actors are quite amateur at what they're doing, but they still are fooling a lot of people. I can only imagine what real police officers would say if they watch this, because these guys are just, they're a joke. I mean, and people actually believe that this is real. I mean, come on. These are not riot cops. These are not cops trained to take on a crowd. They're not even cops, period. And another MoveOn rep that appears as a police officer in these videos, who actually appears in their commercial on their website. And we can see here another MoveOn employee taking part in the staged event. The same chant the whole world is watching we heard them use in the Quartzsite, Arizona Jennifer Jones martial law news event, that once we exposed all the actors as who they were, the whole world stopped watching. So I hope you do the same with this event, and I hope you start watching these actors and hold them accountable. Here we see another MoveOn.org employee playing multiple roles in this event. The center screenshot is from a commercial that they filmed that they have hosted on their website. The other two are from the MoveOn Occupy Wall Street incident that we see on the news. He's playing an activist being arrested in the one scene, and he's playing a police officer doing the arresting in the other. Just like you would see in any film or video production, you're going to see spots on the ground that are called marks. These are spots that are predetermined, that the director has told the actor that they need to be on this spot at a certain period in the production. Now that's because the cameras have been focused to that point and the lighting and everything is set, and everybody around them, the supporting crew, knows where they're going to be so they can make sure that they get the shot. So when we see these marks on the ground, we can rest assured that this is a staged, scripted event. Now here's where I kick some holes in the matrix and make you understand that things in Hollywood happen as planned. Things at normal events that are spontaneous don't happen so predictably. So you wouldn't have a camera trained on a spot that you knew where something was going to happen in a real life situation. But here we're talking about Hollywood. So we have this mark where they're arresting this guy on, right? Now the crowd has walked up to this point and this was a first take, and then they arrest the guy. Now we can see that they've done multiple takes on this same spot, the same mark, because in another scene we see the same spot, same words, police on the ground. We see the crowd in those takes seated on the ground. Now, right there, that shows you that this is a scripted, staged event, and it's not a live, spontaneous, real-world happening. Now, you have to understand this. You have to keep this in your mind, and when you see things like this, it should throw flags. Things just don't happen so perfectly planned. That's Hollywood. That's magic from the movies. They don't happen like that in real life. So keep this in mind and start opening your eyes and waking up to when things just look too perfectly planned. They usually are. So here's another use of a mark. They arrested one guy and they made sure that his head was as close to this mark on the spot as they could get. It's because the camera was fixed to that spot beforehand, and they needed to get the shot with the lighting and make sure that the shot was good. Now they take these pre-planned events and they intermix it with people that are shooting live and streaming video and whatnot from their cell phones. Now it doesn't matter if the event is streaming live. The actors that are involved know what to do. They've already been given their roles and their lines, and they know where the marks are, so they act out as accordingly to the script. So from the observer's point of view that's standing as a bystander, it may look like it's a live streaming event, and they wouldn't know that it was planned out. So you will get individuals that have seen this event, that were there, that think that, oh, it's a real event because they watched it happen. Well, they just don't realize that the people that are involved are actors, and they've been preset with a script that they have to act out, and with the marks. So the people that are in the know have the cameras already set up by the marks, so they make sure that they get the shots when needed, as we can see with Cliff and with Pittman. Cliff, of course, is doing a sound right now with the mic up on the boom and the camera up top, and Pittman's doing a second camera shot from the side. But I want you to notice something that plays throughout all their events, especially the ones from Arizona, is, again, we see another actor here being used, but the product placements of corporate products, especially Apple. We see with Jared Loughner the Apple earbuds. We see Giffords with the Apple iPad. Now we see this. Of course, this guy knows he's going to be on film. He knows there's a camera in front of him, but he's still got his headset on and he's playing with his iPad. So just think about this when you're watching these staged events, and realize that corporations are behind these events. They want their products to be seen by people on the TV, and they pay these production companies to use their products. So what have we learned today? We've learned that MoveOn.org is behind this event when it comes to the acting and production. Now, who is funding them? That's George Soros and a bunch of millionaire and billionaires, including, I would imagine, this is speculation though, that Maurice Greenberg is involved in it as well. Although I haven't seen some of their actors involved in this, or their family members that have been involved in everything else that I've been researching, they're not involved in this. But we do know that they do have ties to the Giffords event, and we see that Radiant Helix Media is here filming this, so there is a tie-in, and it would be safe to say that he's one of the millionaire or billionaires that's behind Soros.
The silent majority is a minority if their voices are not heard. Humanity needs you. Your governments have failed you. They sit atop their thrones and abuse their power. They are deaf to the will of the people. The system is broken. If this moment passes idly by without a whimper, then together we will all be at fault for securing that future generations will never have a voice. We will wear masks to show our solidarity, that we are all one in the belief that all of our governments have failed humanity completely. You, our dear friends, are cordially invited to make the change we all really need. Whatever your complaint is against your ruling power, stand tall and make together must act in solidarity. No longer can we maintain the me, or my political party, mentality where we are all affected by governments that do not listen to their people's wishes. Together we must stand tall and remind this world what it has forgotten. That fairness, justice and freedom are more than just words.
At this image the ACLU has put out, showing the Constitution-free zone that DHS has declared in the United States, so that we can begin to wrap our minds around the millions of Americans whose freedoms were just tossed out the window, whose freedoms were stripped away from them, who now have no constitution, no rights in these United States of America. Nearly 2 out of 3 Americans, 197.4 million people, live within 100 miles of the U.S. land and coastal borders, according to the 2007 figures from the U.S. Census Bureau. 197.4 million Americans have lost their freedoms because they no longer have the Constitution of the United States to protect them. Now, when I say them, I mean us. I no longer have the Constitution of the United States to protect me. That's what DHS has declared. And 2 out of 3 Americans are right alongside me. Do you live in this Constitution-free zone of the United States? Look at this. This is unbelievable. DHS believes they are above the law. What does that mean to us? It means they are free for search and seizure of anything and everything, from electronics, computers, phones, our business, our papers, our personal information, and ourselves, our persons, are no longer protected. They can do anything to us. They are above the law according to DHS and what they believe and what they have declared. There is no law in this Constitution-free zone. Well, I have a little something to tell DHS. I don't live in your Constitution-free zone, as you have so lawlessly declared. I live in a constitutionally free zone.
After about 8 months, the entire probe was halted. It left about 1,700 names totally unchecked, 1,700 alleged kiddie porn customers, an unknown number of whom may still work in some capacity for the Defense Department.
I would say, or my staff would say to him or her at some point, you know, when you're done working on the Hill, we'd very much like you to consider coming to work for us. Now, the moment I said that to them, or any of our staff said that to them, that was it. We own them.
I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic, and I'm continuing to do that.
Greetings, we are anonymous. To those who wish to identify us, know this. We are teachers and doctors. We are lawyers and judges. We are soldiers and firemen. We are factory workers and sanitation workers. We are engineers and IT specialists. We are the desperate poor you pass on the street. We are the millionaires who have a conscience. We are the people you look down on in the checkout lane. We are the police who dare to disobey illegal orders. We are the patriots who refuse to blindly obey and look away. We are the old gray ones and the young new bloods. We are your mothers, daughters, sons and fathers. To all people at all levels of government agencies, military and media, you are living under the direction of a police state ruled by corporations and contractors. Your government has been overthrown from within. The scale of the corruption is beyond the ability of any presidential election to resolve. Governments that do not exist by the consent of the governed to serve the needs of the people have no right to exist. It is your duty to dissent against the treasonous oligarchy that has usurped the rightful power of the governed on behalf of profit interests. It is up to you to dissent, silently and publicly, in words and in actions. It is your patriotic duty to oppose the tyrannical and despotic system that greed and apathy help to create. Their show of force is a show of their weakness, and a show of our strength. Through nonviolent resistance we can win this. But if you do not dissent, your children will inherit a police state based upon social Darwinism and the absolute authority of an illegitimate oligarchy in which politicians are prostitutes and functionaries of the will of corporations. If you do not dissent, the next generation will know your country as a land of hopelessness in which speech and rights are determined by wealth. If you do not dissent, every soldier who has died serving your country will have died to ensure the absolute profits of corrupt and treasonous contractors who abuse agencies, as the private armies of banks, industries, and multinational corporations. If you do not see the reality of these statements, go back to sleep. May you rest well in your slumber, lest you awake to absolute tyranny. But if you are aware of the truth of these statements, if this is not the world you wish to leave for your family, then know this. Anyone can be anonymous. The corrupt fear us, the honest support us, and the brave join us. We are not the private army of any government, politician, religion, or cult. We are the people, the only system. We are the data angels calling on every American at every level of government and media. Leak, harvest, and archive all evidence of wrongdoing, expose all corruption. We must dissent. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. Georgia.
He's still at it, and we need to understand what his agenda is and what his resources, because he's not through, and you and I are both the pawns and the prize in this drama. His titles remind you, he's the prince of this world, we said. He's the prince of the power of the air. He's the head of the world ruler. You know, and it's a shock to realize how in step and how managed our diverse media is. You'd think there was competition. No, they are in lockstep to his march, whether they realize it or not. Head of the world rulers of darkness. He's the God of this age. Ooh. What's our present predicament? Let's take a step back. America is in moral freefall. Have you noticed? You and I are victims, not of the Democrats or the liberals, what have you. No, no, no. We're victims of spiritual warfare. We have a media that's masking truth, that's going out of its way to hide from you the truth of things that you need to know to survive. We have courts without justice, corruption everywhere. We have anger that replaces what used to be patriotism. Our schools are deliberately dumbing down our youth. Goals 2011 are deliberate attempts to have a malleable electorate. They are deliberately dumbing down and teaching lies in our schools because we let them. We've replaced our traditional heritage that we were founded on with multiculturalism, revisionism, and values relativism. It used to be that even the simplest peasant in this country, sending his kids to college, had the dream that at least they'd learn right from wrong. How ironic it is that our colleges deny the existence of right and wrong. Our government is now the purveyor of immorality. Have you noticed that? I'll tell you why in a minute. Why should we be surprised? Governments have always loved crises. They provide the rationale for increased budgets and bureaucracies and subjugating the population. Crises do. Most new dictators create external crises to consolidate their internal powers, called wars. In our country, we long ago learned that social crises serve as well as military ones. And there's an insight that you need to have that supplies the missing link. Immorality results in social crises. Is it any surprise to learn that governments have an enormous incentive to promote immorality? Let me diagram this for you. Governments love military crises because they lead to budgets and bureaucracies and a curtailment of our freedoms. Okay. In our country, we've learned something very useful. You don't have to have a military crisis. Social crises work just as well. A war on poverty, a war on terror, whatever. Save the environment, you name it. What creates social crises? Immorality. The pill in 1960, boy, did that change our morality, right? Roe versus Wade. Where's the most dangerous place for an American to be? In the womb of the mother. 1 chance in 4 of being murdered. Immorality creates social crises. That's why we have one-parent families and all the other aspects of that. Okay. Well, if governments benefit from social crises and immorality called social crises, is it any surprise that government has an incentive to promote immorality? No wonder they're promoting homosexuality and it's the sodomist lifestyle. And on it goes. Increasing government, increasing morality, increasing social crisis, and you're on that self-feeding spiral. That's one of the many reasons that our founding fathers tried to avoid us having a democracy. A democracy is mob rule. We had at one time a republic, which has democratic features but has safeguards. Separation of powers, due process of law, and a lot of other issues. Well, what is our resource then? Individually, the armor of God. The armor of God. Paul, starting in verse 10, says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might." Not your might, his might. Put on the whole armor of God that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. The whole armor, not just your favorite pieces. The whole armor. Why? Here's our threat assessment right here. We started off with that in this whole session. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor." There he says it a second time. "Take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth." That's your belt. That's the thing upon which everything else depends and hangs on. Having your loins girt about with truth. And having on the breastplate of righteousness. Not your righteousness, his righteousness. Now, a lot of people always assume that Paul is drawing these idioms from the Praetorian Guard that's chained to him. That as he looks at him, he's sort of using that as his model. No, he's quoting this from the Old Testament. Everybody likes to build that model. It's not true. The breastplate of righteousness, the sword of the Spirit, virtually all these idioms are traceable quotes from the Old Testament. But we'll just stay on track here. Having on the breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate is critical. That's life-threatening. You can get other kinds of wounds. You don't want a wound that the breastplate protects you against. So you need to be sure of your security. Have your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Feet shod with the preparation. If you've taken any martial arts or if you had any wrestling or boxing, you know the importance of footwork. At the Naval Academy, you have a year for the first several years, you have a year of boxing, a year of wrestling as part of the program. And then you get that all comes together later in hand-to-hand. But I happen to hate boxing. I just don't like boxing. I just don't like it. Fortunately, I happen to have kind of a long reach, so I didn't get in too much trouble. But I used to hate that. But the one thing you really learn is footwork. Heel to toe, the whole thing. Your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Very, very graphic. If you're going to be in combat, you better be prepared. Above all, taking the shield of faith. The Roman soldiers had a shield, and they would spend their time making sure it was in repair. They didn't wait for the battle to plug the holes. If it had a problem from a previous engagement, they would fix that right away. Well, are there holes in your shield of faith? Are there problem areas that bother you? Fix them now. Double back on those. Get the answers you need. If there's a hole that needs repair, do it now. Don't wait until you're in the battle, because you're in the battle right now. You're on enemy territory as it stands. The Bible taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench the fiery darts of the wicked. You want that to be bulletproof. And take the helmet of salvation. The helmet of salvation. There again, you need to know your ground. You need to know the three tenses of salvation. The past tense called justification, the present tense called sanctification, and the future tense called glorification. Do your homework. Find out about that. And just owning a helmet isn't any good. You got to be wearing it. You can tell the ones who aren't wearing it by the bandages. And here's the one that we all know and love. The sword of the Spirit. Every one of us know that's the Word of God. That's the only offensive weapon you have. Everything else listed is defensive. Your shield, your helmet, and so forth. The sword is two-edged. It is your offensive weapon. The sword of the Spirit. It's interesting, the technology of those days, early centuries, seemed to favor a long curved sword. Most armies were equipped with a long sword. The Roman army did something rather different. They developed the machaira, 24 inches, short, double-edged sword. And with that short sword, they conquered the world. But there's two things you need to know about the machaira. You had to know how to use it, and you had to practice. Because it was the whole idea was to close in close. And same thing's true with the Word of God. It doesn't do any good. Your Bible doesn't do any good if it's getting dust on your bookshelf. You got to be in it every day. And just knowing your Bible ain't enough. You got to put it into practice. You got to know where to go to find what you're looking for. And you got to be able to present the message that God has given you to present. So it takes practice in execution. And everybody talks about Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 17, the armor of God, and everybody misses the most important one. I've seen lists from Ephesians 6 that do not include verse 18. And that's stupid. I'm sorry I can't be more hospitable, because this is your heavy artillery. This is your weapon for action at a distance. Praying always with prayer and supplication in the Spirit. Wow. And watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. You can participate in helping the Christians that are being assassinated in the Sudan. And you can do that without getting an airplane ticket. You can do that in your living room or in your bedroom by kneeling by your bedside and praying for them. Everybody's upset about the election right now. There's all kinds of concerns. Let me tell you, your prayer closet is more powerful than our ballot boxes. Praying always, Paul says. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit. And watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. And I want you to notice what Paul prays for. Praying always, yes, and for me. Pray for me, he says. I want you to pray for me, gang. It is a warfare. Pray for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly. Can you imagine Paul asking for boldness? I'm always amused as I visualize him writing this thing. He's got a Praetorian guard chained to him. You know why? So the guard couldn't get away. Can you imagine being chained to Paul for a full shift? Remember what Woody Allen said, his definition of hell was to be stuck in an elevator with a life insurance salesman. Cute little soundbite, but can you imagine being chained to Paul? And many of them came to faith. We learned that from the epistles. The household of faith refers to the Praetorians. And that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in bonds, that therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. That's Paul talking. He's praying for boldness. You got to be kidding. But praise God for Paul, that I may open my mouth boldly. Well, we've been talking a lot about Satan and dark things. Let's talk a little bit about not Satan, but our guy. I love this. This is one of my favorite physics verses in the Bible. It's a physics verse. 1 John 3:2. John says, "Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Now, you can draw a lot of inferences from that are perfectly legitimate and appropriate, but I don't think you can fully understand what he's saying unless you have a background in advanced math or physics. And what I mean by that is, what he's saying here, does not yet appear what we shall be. He's talking about the resurrection body. We don't quite understand what it's all about. We know we're the sons of God. It does not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he, Christ, shall appear, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is. If I had a camera here and I took a picture of you, you're a three-dimensional being, and I end up with a two-dimensional representation of you. If I have a hologram, I can get a three-dimensional representation of you, but I can best see you by also being a three-dimensional being with you. Now, the question that people speculate, how many dimensions does Christ have? We know he has more than 4. More than 3 for sure. He goes through walls and all that stuff. More than for a lot of reasons. If you're into that kind of analysis, most people that get into that seriously come to the conclusion he has to have had at least 11 dimensions. But whatever it is, don't speculate. We know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. Why? For we shall see him as he is. What that's saying to me is that whatever dimensionality he presently enjoys, we will too. I'm not saying we're going to be equal with him. Don't misunderstand me. But I think we will be able to comprehend him because we will be, in that sense, like him. Exciting stuff. We know that he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And what's he really up to? See, our writer of Hebrews, I believe it's Paul, he quotes Psalm 8, verse 5, "Thou madest him for a little while lower than the angels. Thou crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands." See, Adam through sin forfeited his dominion to Satan. But did he ever have dominion over the angels? No. Thou crownest him, this last Adam, with glory and honor, and did set him over the works of thy hands, which include the angels. The last Adam gained dominion over everything. Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet, for in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. But now we see not yet all things put under him. Not quite yet. Because it goes on here. There's some unfinished business that remains. Eventually, you and I are going to be joint heirs with him, aren't we? That's exactly what Paul also said in 1 Corinthians 15. "But now is Christ risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept? For since by man came death, by man came also resurrection from the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. Every man in his own order. Christ the first fruits, afterward they that are Christ's at his coming. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. For he must reign till death hath put all enemies under his feet, and the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." Delivered up the kingdom. There we started with the kingdom, here we are again. "For he hath put all things under his feet, but when he saith, all things are put under him, it is manifest that he is accepted, which did put all things under him. And when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subject unto him that put all things under him, that God may be" what? All in all. That's the goal. The astonishing discovery is it's going to take Christ 1,000 years to get it in that shape. Wow. Interesting. Well, Paul also, I can never resist. I want to get away from Satan and all the stuff we've been talking about, leave on a higher note here. "What shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifieth. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who maketh intercession for us. And who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword? Nay. As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, there they are again, aren't they? Nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Okay, we've been talking about kingship. I'm going to just wrap it up by talking about our king. As most of you know, I'm not a Republican nor a Democrat. I'm a monarchist. I want to tell you about my candidate. He's a king of the Jews. Yes, he is going to play the racial card here. He's the king of the Jews. He's the king of Israel. He's a national king. Wow. My king is a racial king. My king is a national king. He's the king of all the ages, the king of heaven, the king of glory, and king of kings and lord of lords. And the real issue for each of us, do you know him? Do you really know him? He was a prophet before Moses, a priest after Melchizedek, a champion like Joshua, an offering in the place of Isaac, a king from the line of David, a wise counselor above Solomon. He was beloved, rejected, and then exalted son like Joseph, but yet far more. The heavens declare his glory, the firmament shows his handiwork. He who is, who was, and always will be, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph and the Tau, the A and the Z. Yes, he was the first fruits of them that slept. He's the ego eimi, the Ichyach asher Ichyach, the I am that I am. He was the voice of the burning bush. Yes, he was the captain of the Lord's host. He was the conqueror of Jericho, despite what the music says. He's enduringly strong, entirely sincere, eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful, imperially powerful, impartially merciful. In him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily, the very God of very God. He's our kinsman redeemer, but he's also our avenger of blood. He's our city of refuge. He's our performing high priest, our personal prophet, our reigning king. He's the loftiest study in literature. He's the highest personality in philosophy. He's the fundamental doctrine of theology. He's the supreme problem in higher criticism. He's the miracle of all the ages, the superlative of everything good. You and I are the beneficiaries of a love letter. It was written in blood on a wooden cross erected in Judea some 2,000 years ago. He was crucified on a cross of wood, and yet he made the hill on which it stood. By him were all things made that were made. Without him was not anything made that was made. By him are all things held together. Question, what held him to that cross? It wasn't the nails. At any time he could have said, enough already, I am out of here. What held him to that cross? It was his love for you and me. He was born of a woman so you and I could be born again. He humbled himself so that we could be lifted up. He became a servant so that we could be joint heirs with him. He suffered rejection so that we could become his friends. He denied himself so that we could freely receive all things. He gave himself so that he could bless us in every way. He's available to the tempted and tried. He blesses the young. He cleanses the lepers. He defends the feeble. He delivers the captives. He discharges the debtors. He forgives the sinners. He franchises the meek. He guards the besieged. He heals the sick. He provides strength to the weak. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. He sympathizes and he saves. His offices are manifold. His reign is righteous. His promises are sure. His goodness is limitless. His light is matchless. His grace is sufficient. His love never changes. His mercy is everlasting. His word is enough. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. I wish I could describe him to you. He's indescribable. He's incomprehensible. He's irresistible. He's invincible. The heaven of heavens cannot contain him. Man cannot explain him. The Pharisees couldn't stand him, but soon learned they couldn't stop him. The personal representative of the ruler of the world could not find fault with him. The witnesses could not agree against him. Herod couldn't kill him. The death couldn't handle him. The grave couldn't hold him. He's always been and always will be. He had no predecessor, and he will have no successor. You can't impeach him, and he ain't going to resign. His name is above every name, that at the name of Yeshua, every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. His is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless you.